and also Dawn Neeson. But first, let's walk you through the front pages this morning. Concerns over the looming Israeli ground invasion leads the Financial Times. Their headline, residents flee Gaza City in fear. Similarly, here's the Eye, no escape. Gazans try to flee but face Israel's revenge. The Guardian says thousands have already fled their homes ahead of the expected invasion. And the Telegraph reports that Israel has already sent some forces in and is warning of a powerful offensive to come. Likewise, the Mail, Israel's tank strike into Gaza, and the Express carries a plea from the Archbishop of Canterbury to give innocent people in Gaza the chance to survive. The Times focuses on the plight of a disabled teenage girl who was one of the people taken hostage by the Hamas attackers last week. And the Mirror says that police in the UK have been placed on high alert for possible terror attacks connected to the conflict in the Middle East. And the Sun reports that the BBC has agreed to pay £9 million in compensation for Freddie Flintoff after his crash injuries while working on the motoring show Top Gear. Well, with us this morning to review the papers is the UK editor of The Big Issue, Paul McNamee, and also the former editor of The Daily Star, Dawn Neeson. A very good morning to both of you two. How lovely to have you in the studio. Afraid not a lot of cheer, is there, in the papers. Dawn, that image on the front there of the Daily Mail of those tanks, and of course the world is watching and waiting.
In fear. I mean, you can't believe, Sam, that it's a week ago today that Hamas went into Israel and killed people at the kibbutz and the peace rave in the desert. And 1 week on, the situation just gets worse and worse on a minute-by-minute basis. Pretty much every single front page of the newspapers today has the story with very graphic images of incredibly upsetting people crying, people living in fear, people fleeing Gaza. And obviously on the front page of the Mail, which is the one we're talking about now, the tanks are amassed on the border, about to go in. There have already been some incursions in, but Israel have given the citizens of Gaza, which is smaller than the Isle of Wight, by the way. It's a tiny area of land, 1.2 million people, to move to the south of the country. But, you know, 1.2 million people is like the population of Glasgow and Clyde.
Yeah, we were saying it's like Birmingham.
Yes, absolutely. Trying to get your head round this amount of people. Can you imagine being told now, this morning, right, get up and go and leave and move through the country, otherwise you're going to die. Hamas, I say, telling people in Gaza not to move, but most of them are ignoring. And inside of the Daily Mail today, which is the paper we're talking about, there are incredible scenes of entire families fleeing for their lives with whatever they can carry. You know, we're talking whole generations, grandparents, small children being carried, and people carrying. There's a lovely picture of a lady carrying a little pet cat here as well. It's just heartbreaking stuff, and it is absolutely terrifying what's going to happen next.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's the big question.
I mean, Iran are already saying, you know, that, you know, whatever Israel do now, there's going to be a terrible price to pay. You know, it's just. I don't know what the answers are. If we could solve the problem of peace in the Middle East, sitting here, then it'd be amazing. But there doesn't appear to be any easy answers. But people are suffering on both sides, and it's just horrific.
And meanwhile, that 24-hour deadline has passed.
Yes.
And at the heart of this, Paul, is very much a human story, isn't it? And the front page of the Times encapsulates that very well, and also has you see people anguish, you know, writ on their faces.
Yes.
And a story about a young woman, a young girl, 17, disabled, taken hostage by Hamas.
Yes, and Dawn's talked about some of the figures and the volumes of people and that massive humanity that are having to walk, a lot of them walk from Gaza City south. But with this, we look at the individual impact on people, on families. The girl you're talking about suffers from muscular dystrophy. She was at the festival in the desert. Her family thinks she's been taken and her father with her. And it is just the heartbreak of the family going through that, the not knowing what comes next. That has been repeated and repeated. And as you go through the details in the Times, it's not just the fear of family in Israel and South Israel, it is this spread of the fear as it goes around the world. Jewish people in North London who are facing attacks and a rise in anti-Semitism that has been well covered. Schools that are facing much more, they have to have more patrols and more controls to protect their pupils. So while the impact is there and there's very individual and personal stories, it is spreading around the globe. You had footage earlier of people.
Also, what happened in France, which is also being attributed, the stabbing of that high school is being attributed to the tensions in the Middle East.
Yes, well, I mean, there was urged to be a day of anger and a day of action, and I think that's why I wanted to bring the Daily Express into this conversation, because each paper handles an individual. The Daily Mail is particularly aggressive with the pictures of the tanks. The Daily Express's front page, Give Innocence a Chance of Life, and it shows an incredibly upsetting picture of a little girl in Gaza with blood and dirt all over her face, trying to escape to safety. It's an incredibly moving picture. And inside they've got a matching picture of a little boy in Israel who has learned that his family have been killed whilst being held hostage in Gaza. And you know what I keep coming back to, Sam, and this story is about the Archbishop of Canterbury, by the way, who's pleaded that the sins of Hamas are not borne by the citizens of Gaza. Yeah. And that's what's happening. The thing is, with both of these countries, with Gaza and Palestine and with Israel, they're incredibly young populations. I mean, it's like 52.3% of Palestinians are under the age of 18. 70% of them have never voted.
More than 500 of the people killed have been children.
Yes, yeah. They have no link to Hamas whatsoever. They just happen to be living in this, as it's been described, this hellhole of a strip of land with hell going on all around them, with sort of like, Hamas, who are a terrorist organisation. They have been recognised as such throughout the world, and the might of Israel on the border, and they're so young. It is absolutely heartbreaking to see these pictures.
You make a very good point, but also I think what's very interesting is the messaging from around the world, because when this first happened, government after government all said, we support Israel's right to defend themselves.
Yes.
Not all, but many. And now the messaging is coming, but you need to defend yourself in a proportionate way.
Well, this was always going to be the case. It felt as though there was going to be a window for Israel to strike back, because they were under attack. We've heard it described as an existential threat in the nation of Israel. So, of course, they were going to find a way to show that they were not going to be pushed around or indeed destroyed by Hamas. They had to go in. They had to do something. But now, because of what we see, because of the difficulty that Israel are in such a bind now, because if they do have any kind of response, proportional or not, there are going to be victims. There's going to be innocent victims. What do? And then there's the potential for them getting pulled in the north, as Dawn said, if Hezbollah attack, then Israel are very stretched. What do they then do in Gaza? Is it a ground war? I think we're at such a delicate and difficult place now in the world with what Israel do next, and then how Hamas respond to that. That the idea of proportional response, I think, is now, it's gone. And while nations in the West might call for some calming, I think we're a long way from that. We're all just waiting to see over the next number of hours what happens when Israel go in.
Well, they're interesting that 24-hour deadline has passed.
It has passed, hasn't it? Yeah, and it was curious about that. But the thing is, I mean, what did Hamas think they would achieve when they went in and murdered innocent people in the kibbutz and the rave in the desert? What did they think they would achieve? It does make you wonder whether there was some... They realised that this would trigger this unrest in the area, because otherwise I don't know what the end game was, Sam, with that. Why would you do that? Exactly. And how, as Paul was just saying, what are Israel now meant to do? They can't not respond, but what is a level of response that is appropriate, that isn't going to trigger enormous unrest across the whole area?
Well, impossible, isn't it, to try and second-guess the motives of a prescribed terrorist group like Hamas. Meanwhile, as we've already been touching on, Paul, an impossible choice for people in Gaza. Hamas are saying, don't go, you're much safer staying here, and yet Israeli forces are saying you must go.
Yeah, and this is a number of newspapers are leading with what happens to the residents in Gaza City and the north, because there is nowhere for them to go. It's such a small area. They don't want to be bombed. They don't want to be killed. If they go south, what is there in the south? The borders are closed into Egypt, so there's going to be even more people crammed into an even smaller area, and they've no idea whether, now they've been displaced and made homeless, whether they're going to be able to go back north over those number of miles and their homes are still going to be there. So I think that clearly that is going to become something of the leading story of the next number of days, whatever footage and whatever we can get out of there. But it just feels as though we're in such a moment of flux globally, that we want to make sure that people who are innocent in this, that their homes are not destroyed, that their lives are not destroyed. But at the same time, we understand that Israel are going to make a point.
Yeah, indeed. And thinking about how the repercussions sort of ripple out, we're going to see marches, aren't we, taking place, not just in London, in places around the country. And police are on high alert, potential violence. And you also see images that we've been showing on Sky of women, Palestinians supporting women, taking down photos that people have posted of missing Israeli children.
Which was heartbreaking to see. And you understand that tensions are incredibly high and people are reacting on a gut level. They really are. They're not thinking what they are actually doing. And those women doing that, you thought, these are missing children. These are kids. Why are you doing that? And this is the story on the front page of the Telegraph, and it's basically police are braced for clashes this weekend as pro-Palestine